The NFC West is expected to be one of the most top-heavy divisions in the NFL this upcoming season. You have the 49ers, who are expected to be a Super Bowl contender again this season, and a improved Seattle Seahawks team that made the playoffs last year. Then you have the Rams and Cardinals, who are expected to be two of the worst teams in the NFL. But welcome on into GoldSheet TV. I'm your host, Eric Pauly, with my co-host, Zayd. And today, as I mentioned, we're going over all things NFC West. I want to remind everybody that GoldSheet, Confidential, and Kickoff are now all one product on GoldSheet.com. And also all the LTS picks that were that service on GoldSheet.com are now hosted on WagerTalk.com. So same exact services, just now one on GoldSheet.com, one product, and all the picks, one product on WagerTalk.com. But let's get right into it. So the San Francisco 49ers are a very interesting situation because obviously they have one of the most loaded rosters in all of the NFL, as well as one of the most creative offensive minds in the NFL with Coach Kyle Shanahan. However, they don't know exactly who is going to be under center. You have Trey Lance, their number one pick from a couple years ago, who is coming off a serious leg injury. You have Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, coming off an amazing stretch last season, who then hurt his elbow, and his status as he should be back, but obviously a quarterback coming back from an elbow injury is going to be a lot to, fix. Then you have Sam Darnold, a former number one pick of the New York Jets, who has not had a great career so far. He has shown flashes and now will have the best supporting cast he's ever had around him, and maybe they can tap that tank. But Zayd, I'm going to go right to you first. The 49ers quarterback situation, who do you expect to be starting for the 49ers, and is this person going to be able to elevate this game to make this 49ers team as scary as they could be?
Yeah, 100%. I think when you look at the 49ers overall, Brock Purdy last year came on short notice, got the starting job due to injury, and, he performed really well. He came in, he game managed, he made plays when he had to make the plays, and overall he ran the offense very, very well. I think when you look at Trey Lance, he's a player that they drafted. They were high on coming in camp. They were raving about him, and then unfortunately he gets injured. But I think right now the job is Purdy's. I think they brought a guy like Sam Darnold in to kind of challenge these two younger guys, maybe teach them a little something overall, but get the battle going in camp between the three quarterbacks. And I think overall Purdy's going to lead the way, and if he does well, he keeps that job. And if he doesn't, maybe there's some rumblings about bringing in Trey Lance and seeing how he could do. But, we'll see throughout the preseason and throughout training camp how the quarterback battle is going.
Yeah, so this is a great time to start learning, or for us to really see, because it's really unique to have a situation where a team outside the quarterback situation is really so good that not knowing who's under center isn't, I'm not going to say a big deal, because obviously it is going to end up playing a factor at the end of the day. But this team is just so loaded that if they just get average quarterback play from any of these guys, they're a Super Bowl contender. They don't even need top tier quarterback play. My one thing that I will say though is, while I just want to go kind of on a rundown of the quarterbacks, I personally think Trey Lance is horrible. Right? I know it's hard to really make any declarations like that because we've only seen him in such limited action. He got hurt. But we're talking about a player who, when he was drafted, only had a year of collegiate experience under his belt. Then he missed the season because of COVID. He played for North Dakota State. It's not like he was playing at Alabama, tearing up the competition, so you can maybe give him the benefit of the doubt. And when he came into the NFL, he did play in a bad, horrible condition game against the Bears that monsoon, as well as the game where he got injured. That was just an unfortunate situation. I never wish an injury upon everybody. But I'm very bearish on Trey Lance and his ability to really be a quarterback of the future. I don't care what John Lynch says about how good he is in training camp or how he's light years ahead of where he was this time last year. I'm calling BS personally, and I'm not a fan of Lance. I think the best situation for the Niners would be, though, if Sam Darnold actually becomes a good passer. So now, while I obviously have to give credit where it's due for Brock Purdy, however, last year in his kind of run of dominance, and obviously, unfortunately, ended short with that injury, when he was undefeated as a starter in the regular season, he was just playing bad pass defenses, and the Niners in general were playing bad teams. So, Zayd, do you have any concern with Purdy, that considering, the Seahawks, Cardinals, Eagles, Ravens, Commanders, Rams to end the season? It's not like he played a gauntlet of pass defenses. Does this concern you that maybe Purdy, his success last season is going to not be able to be replicated? Or do you think that, still a young player, that he has the ability to ascend even after this injury?
Yeah, I think honestly, Purdy has the ability to ascend in my eyes. I think he made the right plays in right situations throughout last year. And if you look at what he was doing in late game situations, he was able to, limit his turnovers. He was able to find the guys. He was able to do exactly what the 49ers need, and that's manage the game and occasionally make plays. The 49ers don't need someone that's going to go out and try to make these crazy plays and extend plays and try to make passes downfield. They need guys that are going to run the ball. They're going to find their playmakers in Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, and all the weapons that they have. And I think Purdy's the perfect guy for the job.
So looking at the rest of the Niners offense, or just roster in general, I should say, they're loaded offensively. Skill position players all over the field, obviously. But their offensive line isn't that great. And another thing to take a note of also is while this defense was amazing last season, they also played a very poor schedule of opposing quarterbacks. They didn't really play any great teams. And when they did play a great team in the Chiefs ripped them to absolute shreds when they played last season. So, Zayd, do you have any concerns that this defense might take a step back a little bit because they're playing a much tougher schedule this upcoming season? Or do you think that, once they get the Bosa deal ironed out, then obviously the addition of Javon Hargrave, that they should still be business as usual on defense, and this should be one of the best defensive teams in the league next year?
I think this 100% should be one of the best defenses in the league next year. I think do they pass the eye test is the big question. And I think, regardless of who they played quarterback wise last year, they passed the eye test for me all the way through. And the numbers back them up as well. I just think you're going to have Bosa back once they iron everything out. And then you have, a similar defense to last year where now you come in, you have a good group of guys that understand how to play with each other, and I think they're going to be able to dominate defensively. I think it's going to be tough for teams to score on them. And then when you look at offensively too, being able to keep their offense on the field is something that helped the defense last year. When you're running the ball with McCaffrey, you're running the ball with even Deebo Samuel, the defense has a chance to rest and they're not on the field as much as they should be, and that helps them even more.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Because something also to mention too is they lost D'Amico Ryans to the Houston Texans, but they hired Steve Wilkes, who's one of the most respected defensive head coaches in football over the recent memory. So I don't expect much of a drop off there. My one big concern though with the 49ers is, like I mentioned, their offensive line is a major concern because they're an injury or two away from having a really disastrous offensive line. But also, as good as Kyle Shanahan is as a head coach in terms of creating offensive plays and schemes, he's been one of the worst coaches in game decision making. No team punted more often inside the opponent territory with 5 yards or less to go last year than San Francisco. And San Francisco also tied for the most field goal attempts in the red zone on 4th and 2 or less. As we've learned in the NFL these days, in those short yardage situations where it's basically a toss up to go for their field goal, going for it is more often than not going to be the optimal play. And we've seen Shanahan lose games in the past because of his inability to, I guess, be aggressive in those situations. Does this concern you, or do you think that maybe if Shanahan learns from these things, that coming into this season, if he decides to start going for these more 4th downs, especially when you have McCaffrey, Deebo, who could pick up 2 yards probably relatively easily, that this team could just be a different animal and there's value in this team winning potentially the NFC?
Yeah, and I think that was a great point you mentioned. When you look back at the 49ers, the reasons they lost some of these bigger games is their inability to go for it on 4th down and to be aggressive. And I think Shanahan has to take a look at what he's done. And I think hopefully during the offseason, they have taken a look and looked at the analytics side of, a 4th and 2, a 4th and 1, even a 4th and 3. Going for it rather than taking those 3 points is crucial in the NFL nowadays. And you've seen so many coaches now starting to jump on the analytics bandwagon and go for it on 4th down, even, around the 50-yard line. Even in your own territory, sometimes you see coaches go for it. I think an aggressive Shanahan is only going to be better for the 49ers. And overall, if they are aggressive, it's going to lead to success.
100%. If Shanahan, as a better head coach, is actually be like a much more scary sight for this league. So 49ers, all things considered, win total 10.5, second favorites to win the NFC. Not hard to see why. And then they're also glaring favorites to win the NFC West. Again, not hard to see why. Moving on to another NFC playoff team last season, the Seattle Seahawks. And I have a good amount of thoughts on the Seahawks, but the first thing I want to mention is talking about some of their offseason signings. So Seattle had 2 first-round picks, and I think they couldn't have done better by drafting Devin Witherspoon, who actually is not signed yet, which I saw yesterday. But hopefully they get that resolved. And also Jackson Smith and Jigba, who, if he lives up to the hype, just like that, the Seahawks have the best wide receiver trio in the NFL. I don't think that that's really a stretch of a take. Adding Jerron Reed back to the mix, of course, Bobby Wagner, and then Draymond Jones and Julian Love, I think were some big offseason pieces that they added. And, of course, they kept Geno Smith for the long haul. So you have this team who's relying on a young offensive line who was very good last season. They had two rookies who played very well. Now a defense who had holes last year. This defense wasn't good, but they made moves to strengthen this defense. What were your overall thoughts, Zayd, on the moves this offseason? Do you think they did a good job patching up some holes, or do you think they left some to be desired?
Honestly, for me, this is one of the teams that I highlighted in the offseason. Jackson Smith-Njigba is a wide receiver where, obviously drafted, in the first round. I think it was the first wide receiver taken in this class. He's a guy that's a certified playmaker. And when you pair him with guys like Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, where now teams are not going to be able to, double Metcalf or have help. You got a guy like Jackson Smith, who in the Rose Bowl put up 347 yards against Utah. This guy's a playmaker and he's a stud. And I think when you have those three wide receivers lined up with each other, mixing in the fact that you got Kenneth Walker at running back, who's played great last year, now they have different guys to look for. I think defenses are going to struggle guarding these guys. And Geno Smith last year, he was a guy that kind of came out of nowhere. Nobody expected him to play as good as he played. He came in. I think there's an improved offensive line with this team. I think you're going to have Geno Smith under center who knows how to manage and win games. And we saw it last year with a 9-8 record. I think this is a team that I'm buying on, and I like taking over, I think they get to 10 wins, and I think they get to it relatively easily. I could see them finishing with even 11 wins. I think this defense is great. They made great signings. I think offensively, they're going to give a lot of teams problems.
So I think that you made a great point by saying that you think they're going to win 10 games, because something that I would look at for the Seahawks is I would take an alternate team total over, a team win total over. Of course you can if you're interested in taking just the flat line going over it in that sense, but there's probably more value in taking an alternate team total over for them, because like you mentioned, there is a pathway for the Seahawks to be one of the better teams in the NFC, considering how bad the NFC is, and that this defense that was bad last year, I thought that they were actually going to draft Jalen Carter to solve some of their run game issues, but instead they go with Draymond Jones and Jaron Reed, also adding Bobby Wagner, who was one of PFF's top-rated linebackers last season too. We know he's obviously a legend on the back nine of his career, but he still can play. But drafting Devon Witherspoon, I think, was a great pick to pair with Tariq Woolen. While again, I did think that at the time that Jalen Carter was the pick, I still see what the Seahawks were thinking. Then obviously, if Jamal Adams, we know he's limited in coverage, but he can tackle well if he's healthy, can only really help. But I'm going to play a little bit of devil's advocate with you, because while I definitely see the situation where the Seahawks are an 11-win team, considering that Pete Carroll has never won less than 7 games, and he's gone over the win total in 6 of his 8 seasons that he's gone over his preseason win total, he's gone over by 2 wins, right? So this year it's set at 9.5 now, which was opened at 8.5. So that number's gotten pushed up, and I'm sure if you shop around, you could still find 8.5. So looking at a 10-plus win total and an alternate at plus money could be the way to go about it. But I want to talk a little Geno Smith with you right now. So Geno Smith was good last year. No one's debating that. He wasn't great. He obviously wasn't bad. He was good. But regression has to be on the horizon, right? According to Pro Football Focus, he had the most dropped interceptions of any quarterback in the NFL last season. And he also didn't play a gauntlet of great pass defenses. Also, as the season progressed, he got worse, and you can attribute that to teams now having tape on him and figuring him out. I do see the other side of it, where now you have 3 elite playmakers, where you don't have to have Geno Smith winning you games by making these crazy throws. You just make some good throws, which he's done. I saw the throws last year. He made some amazing throws. But do you have any concerns about potential Geno Smith regression being too big for this team to handle?
Honestly, I really don't. And I think if we could pull the schedule back up and you look at their route to victory, you're playing teams like the Cardinals 2 times. This is a division where, so you got the Cardinals for 2 games. And then you look at it, you play the Giants, you play the Panthers. They have many winnable games aside that, like, playing the Rams 2 times. They could beat the Rams both games. That's a team that we'll get to in a little bit. But the Rams aren't going to be anything that special. I think when you look at their schedule overall, there's a path to victory for 11 wins, honestly. I like the alternate total of taking a 10 or 11 win side, but I think this is a team that's much improved offensively and defensively, and I think Geno Smith is only going to get better as he gains more confidence in the league. Coming off his first really good season in the NFL, now he comes in, he gets to prepare more, he adds more weapons to his side. I think this is a team that I really like and want to buy into.
Yeah, and honestly, like I've seen so much love for the Seahawks online from sharps and squares alike, realistically. This is a public darling kind of team right now, which obviously gives me pause at always because, as we know, in the National Football League, there's so much turnover with playoff teams year in and year out. We all, as humans, have so much recency bias of, oh, this team made the playoffs, they're going to be good again next year because they added some players, and vice versa. This team maybe didn't add the players you wanted to in the offseason, and they didn't make the playoffs last year, so you write them off. Then what happens? They end up facing an easy schedule, some injury luck, and other luck goes their way, and next thing you know, they're making the postseason. So I see why everybody is in love with the Seahawks, and they're the team that everybody has circled. But in a lot of cases, as we know, in gambling, especially in the NFL, is when everybody's zigging, you have to zag. So I think the best way to approach Seattle from a betting perspective is if you really are like you, Zayd, and you really love them, that you should be looking maybe at an alternate win total over for some plus money. But conversely, if you think that the Seahawks are going to take a step back, because their schedule isn't daunting. They have a relatively easy early schedule. Their mid-schedule stretch against the Niners twice, the Cowboys, and the Eagles is very tough. Then a decent back-end schedule, so maybe there's opportunity to buy low on the middle of the season. But I think you either are taking them alternate over or alternate under, because this team, if Geno Smith regresses the way that realistically he probably could, like if those passes that weren't picked turn into picks, and now teams have tape on him, and injury here or there obviously can mount up. Don't want to like wish that or like can't really predict that, but I would think that going an alternate over or under for Seattle would be the best way to go about it. So because I could see them regressing badly and Geno only be able to win 6 or 7 games, but also they're much improved, and I love what they did on defense. And Pete Carroll's a great head coach, so I could see the case for them winning a bunch of games. So very interesting situation going on in Seattle, and I'm very excited to see how it all transpires. But moving on to a team that I also think is very interesting just for different reasons, and that's the Los Angeles Rams. So it was no shock last year that if you were paying attention that they had a very interesting team build. Their GM said, F those picks. And what happened with them? They had a team full of stars and scrubs. Add on the fact that they had terrible injury luck with just also a group of not that great players, and you have what ended up being a disastrous season a year after winning a Super Bowl. Now coming into this year, they didn't spend any money because they're cap strapped. They have 13 draft picks that they're relying on to hopefully become contributors. They only have 3 stars on defense from a year ago. They have a relatively tough schedule, and the veterans on this team are players like Aaron Donald and Matt Stafford, who now have rings. They're older. They've accomplished on the league. They probably don't want to play for a rebuilding team at this point in time. You also have McVay, who is a great head coach. So organizations don't tank. Organizations may tank, but players are never going to tank. McVay's not going to tank. I'm curious, Zayd, what you think about this team. Like, is this a team that out of the gate McVay's going to try to make competitive, or is this a team where you could see that 3 to 4 games down the line, like they're going to start fire selling and they're just going to try to scrap and start from scratch?
I think it's a team that, McVay's never been the type of coach, come out and just, put his head down and he's going to do everything he can to possibly win. But I think after a couple of games, they're going to notice that they're just not as competitive as everybody else. You mentioned drafting 13 guys that are, supposed to contribute. It's very hard. You lose Jalen Ramsey, who gets shipped off to the Dolphins. It's a good thing they won the title, a couple of years ago, because this is a team now that's literally depleted. Like you mentioned, they don't have the cap space. They got an aging roster. Matthew Stafford's only getting older. He already got his ring. Even Cooper Kupp, like he's a guy that's, played a lot of games, and he's a guy that can get injured where he's fragile. If Cooper Kupp goes down, who do you lean to on offense? You got a Cam Akers at running back, who I'm not really crazy about. I think this is an offense that's going to struggle once you key in on Cooper Kupp. I think this is a defense that's going to struggle with a lot of rookies, a lot of younger players coming in. The real main guy there is Aaron Donald. And besides from Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp offensively and defensively, there's not a lot to like here. And it's reflective in the price of 6.5 wins, sitting at plus 800 to win the NFC West. I think this is a team that's going to be out of it early.
Yeah, and it's easy to see why, because like you mentioned and like I mentioned, that like McVay's not going to come into the season like we're screwed, we're going to lose. Like I wouldn't be shocked if they come and beat Seattle week 1, realistically, because they're going to be prepared. Divisional games always get the juices flowing. 1 loss early in the season or 1 win early in the season, as we know, does not bode is not a time to sound the alarm in the NFL whatsoever. But I think that it's going to be interesting for the Rams. I think it's not a matter of if they start selling off Kupp, Donald, and Stafford. It's a matter of when. So Also, it's important to note, like, where are these players going to go? Like, I really wonder who's going to go out and trade for Aaron Donald. I'm sure all 30 teams are going to be all 31 other teams are going to be interested in Aaron Donald, but he's only going to want to go to a contender probably at this point. And it just makes so much sense for the Rams to kind of take it down. They won their ring. They put all their chips on the table. They won, and now they're reaping having to deal with the negatives of screwing over all those picks, signing all these big name players, and having nothing really to work with. Like, it's hard. You can have 13 draft picks, but if none of them come in the top 100, it's very hard to build a sustainable team from that. So I'm with you, and I think that just in terms of brevity, like, there's nothing really much to be said about the Rams, where McVay is going to try. They're going to start and try to win some football games, but the most likely scenario is that they start selling off players sooner than later. And like you said, it's very well reflected in the market, a win total of 6.5. Like, I would even look toward the under there, because this team, first of all, doesn't have the talent from the get-go outside of those three key players in Kupp, Donald, and Stafford. And how long will those three players be donning a Rams jersey? They could be gone by week 3, 4, 5, or 6, considering how things shake out. So keeping it short and sweet on the Rams as we go to another team, the Arizona Cardinals, who simply are also probably just tanking. Looking at what Arizona did, so an interesting stat. Heading into the season, Jonathan Gannon came over from the Eagles. He was their defensive coordinator, and a lot of people are unsure about this signing, myself included, because what did he do when he got to Arizona is he put together the youngest coaching staff in NFL history. Their defensive coordinator is like 29 years old. The rest of them, nobody's over 40 years old. Not saying that's going to be the killer, but obviously you'd like some more adults in the room and some experience. I love what they did on draft night, trading back and acquiring more picks, but that just kind of epitomizes that this team is looking toward the future, rightfully so. An argument could be made about Jonathan Gannon performing well because rookie head coaches actually perform better than you'd expect. So since 2000, teams with a new head coach have gone over their preseason win total 56% of the time. And there have been 21 teams with a new head coach with a win total of 5.5 or less, like the Cardinals, and 14 of them have gone over their win total by an average of 1.3 wins. So history's saying you have a better than a coin flip chance of the Cardinals actually overperforming this 4.5 wins. When you look at the roster, I find that hard to believe. Talk to me, Zayd. What are your thoughts on the Cardinals this year?
You know, I like to root for a team like the Cardinals, but I just don't see them performing well. I mean, when you look at obviously Kyler Murray coming off this ACL injury, who knows when he's going to even be back, if he's going to be ready for week 1. But you look at the quarterback play, it's like you got Colt McCoy, you got Jeff Driscoll. They drafted a rookie. I think this is a team, and you get rid of DeAndre Hopkins, so you don't really have a lot of weapons. I think this is a team that's going to struggle offensively and defensively. I think they're going to give up a lot of points, and I think they're going to struggle to score. Overall, when you look at the Cardinals, they're plus 2,500 to win the NFC West for a reason. Their total set at 4.5 wins, one of the bottom teams in the league. I think this is a team that's just going to struggle, unfortunately.
Yeah, like, I'd love to give them the benefit of the doubt as well, like you mentioned, but just from a roster perspective, like, they're just a bad football team. They just are devoid of talent on offense and on defense. And going back to Kyler Murray, I mean, obviously, it would be nice if he's healthy. I wish everybody's healthy. However, Kyler Murray, in my opinion, isn't even a good quarterback in the first place. Then you add on the fact that they had one of the hardest schedules last year, and they're due to have probably a top 15 hardest schedule again this season. There's just not a lot of, paths, even with Kyler Murray coming back by week 4, 5, 6, which in my opinion, he should sit the whole season. There's no reason to play him, because tanking and having potentially, right, the Texans, which we talk about in the AFC South preview, while I think that they might be a little bit better than advertised, they're still projected to be one of the worst teams in football. So if the Cardinals also tank or do the closest thing in the NFL to tanking, and the Texans end up being bad as projected, now Arizona comes in next season with 2 very high draft picks, and that is 10 times more beneficial to the longevity and the future of this franchise than trying to win games with Kyler Murray this season. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%, and that's why it's reflective in the price too. I think just to touch on it again, 4.5 wins. They finished 4-13 last year, had the 4th worst point differential in the league, getting outscored by 109 total points. I mean, this team's going to struggle overall, man. And you mentioned the schedule too, like you're playing the Niners, you're playing the Cowboys, you're playing the Bengals back to back to back, and then just overall, this is a team that's going to struggle, bro. they're just going to struggle.
Yeah.
100%.
No, I'm totally with you. It's another situation where it's like not obviously like we try to find the good. And like I just mentioned, there are teams that it's the NFL. There are teams that don't make the playoffs that are expected to be bad that end up shocking everybody being good. However, I don't think it's the Rams this year, and I
This is not
definitely
one
don't
of
think
them.
it's the Cardinals. They're not one of them. It's just like,
Yeah,
last year when you had the Texans and Bears preseason as two of the worst teams, and then the Bears started 2-1. Then what happened? They went 1-14 the rest of the way. The Texans, obviously, one of the worst teams in the NFL all season long. I think that the Rams and Cardinals are the two of those teams where, like we've talked about in other shows, that I thought the Buccaneers might be a little bit underrated at this point, even the Texans and like some teams, the Commanders are expected to be bad, like could be better than advertised. But in the Rams and Cardinals cases, despite the fact that the stat I mentioned that first-year coaches on teams with low win totals actually do end up overperforming, I think that Gannon is not that coach to be good enough. And I think that the Cardinals, just talent-wise, especially considering the quarterback situation, is not good enough. And the best thing for them to do is simply to be bad. So I want to thank everybody for hopping on in to listen to the NFC West preview with myself and Zayd. Zayd, let everybody know where they can find you.
Yeah, you guys can find me at Zayd_Hussein on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok as well. We'll be posting a bunch of preseason content, and then as the season goes, we'll be ready to roll here at the GoldSheet.
Really appreciate everybody tuning in. Remember, liking this video and subscribing to the channel is the best way to help us grow. Thank you all, and we'll see you next week for some future breakdowns. See you guys. Thank you.